welcome to the second official episode of the FilmHounds podcast. That's FilmHounds, one word. I'm Katie Hogan, Reviews and Festivals Editor. Joining me is James Hanton, our News Editor, and Paul Klein, our Features Editor. And we also have our once and future Editor-in-Chief, David Garlick, who is recording and editing and who may or may not say something during this episode. So today we're going to be talking about our films of the year, and hopefully later in this week we'll be able to reveal the FilmHounds film of the year. But without further ado, let's get straight into it. So James, what's your top three films of the year?
Yeah, so my top three of the year in order are The Outrun, The Wild Robot, and Monkey Man.
Fantastic. I love The Wild Robot. And Paul, your top three?
My top three are Sing Sing, Superman, the Christopher Reeve story, and the Hugh Grant vehicle, Heretic.
Yes. My number one film is Robot Dreams, and Love Lies Bleeding, and finally Kneecap. Who wants to go first?
I'll kick off. I can do that. Why not? I'm useful for some things. So I mean, it's been a bit of a weird year for me, like movie-wise. I feel like there's definitely been a lot of things that I haven't had the chance to see, so maybe haven't been able to rank. But out of everything that I saw, The Outrun really kind of jumped out at me as one of the big surprises. I mean, I figured it was going to be good. I mean, it's Saoirse Ronan doing what Saoirse Ronan does best.
Like an alcoholic.
Yeah, basically. But in many ways, it's suited out. I feel like The Outrun is almost a combination of all of Ronan's best parts kind of coalesced into one. There seems to be a little bit of everything she's done in the past in her performance, kind of all kind of tied together to create this incredibly unique individual with such like a resonant story, and the way that it's explored kind of rides that really fine line between sort of magic and sort of very brutal, blunt realism. It's a very difficult watch sometimes, as the content can be incredibly almost distressing, but it's kind of painted in this almost magical way, particularly like the contrast between Orkney and the clubbing scenes in London. It's just a really sort of transfixing experience, transportative experience. And I mean, it's fantastic as well to see Orkney and rural Scotland represented on screen in this way. Call it regional bias on my part.
Yeah. I've actually, to be honest, I've actually not seen The Outrun. That's one I missed. But if this means anything, my mum and my sister absolutely loved it. They read the book first, though. I was gonna say, have you read the book?
I have not, no, but the author of the book, Amy Liptrot, I think is her name, wrote the screenplay for the film. And it's phenomenally well written. Like I said, I wouldn't be able to tell you how it compares to the book, but I'm also a big believer that great adaptations don't necessarily need that extent of familiarity to make sense to the viewer.
Yeah, that's fair.
I was really impressed and blown away.
Sing Sing was a lovely film that came out this year about the arts program at Sing Sing prison. It's actually based on a true story, which I didn't know at the time. And it stars Coleman Domingo. And for me, it was just a really beautiful film about how incarcerated people have as much to give to arts and creativity and things like that, which I know is a big sticking point, particularly in America, where they're a bit lock them up and throw away the key. But a lot of these people, and the film sort of shows this, particularly people in the Black community, African American men, you know, a lot of them are victims of circumstance. And this kind of shows that if you give people an avenue for art, they can make good and they can be better. And I think that was sort of something I needed to see this year, particularly when other things were happening in the world that were maybe not so positive.
Yeah, I get you on that one. So what's the production that they actually focus on in that? Because I've not seen this one either. God, I sound terrible. But
describe it, Paul.
yes,
I think.
What is the show they made?
Normally they do like Shakespeare productions, and then the man who runs it, who was played by your man who was in Sound of Metal, Paul Raci, he says, "What would you guys like to do?" So they all throw out suggestions. So the production they put on is a time traveling comedy about, I think it's called Breaking the Mummy's Code. So it's a time traveling comedy with Freddy Krueger,
Right.
and Robin Hood, pirates, Hamlet. There was something else.
Egyptians.
Basically, it was just a lot of stuff. One guy wants to play Freddy Krueger. One guy wants to play Hamlet. One guy wants to play Robin Hood. One wants to be a Roman emperor. One wants to be a pirate. So this poor guy has to write this.
Hell of a pie.
Oh my god!
This sounds like Bill and Ted, but in a play form. Like, you know, at the end of Bill and Ted, of the first one, they have all the people from history.
So great.
Bill and
That's
Ted in
basically
prison.
it.
Yeah.
That is basically
Bill and
it.
Ted's
They're putting on
excellent
this-
incarceration.
That is basically it. So this like time travel thing with mummies and Freddy Krueger and all this nonsense they put on this play. But really what it shows is art is a fantastic way of rehabilitating people and showing them that there is an avenue. And that if you put Hamlet in anything, it kind of works.
That's true. Hamlet
and
2 was
is
great.
the best actor as well. He's the best actor in the world.
I think it's a very powerful message because I think I just came across like a number today, which I think said something like 22% of the entire world's prison population are incarcerated in America. That's a lot of people potentially getting stripped of their access to the ability to make art, to consume art. And like you said, some of them are there on, to put it bluntly, very unfair terms. And I think like something like Sing Sing really like it illustrates how important art can be to people when there's a lot more from your life that's been taken away.
Yeah, and also it illustrates what prison should be about, which is rehabilitation. Yeah, it's a punishment to a degree, but what it should be is about, you know, getting people prepared to go back into the world and be a part of society. So treating people with a level of respect and intelligence, I think, is the bare minimum that lets them know that actually the world's not going to move on from them, so that when they go out there, they can lead full lives and not reoffend. And I think this film is kind of a testament to that. All the actors, I think with the exception of Paul Raci and Coleman Domingo, are playing themselves. So they are all formerly incarcerated men. So they are people who have, you know, for whatever reason, circumstance or desperation or anything like that, have committed a crime, have gone into the penal system and have come out the other side and have, you know, changed their lives. And now, you know, Clarence Macklin, who's sort of in the supporting actor conversation, gives a phenomenal, I know he's playing himself, but it's hard to play yourself. If you want proof, watch Gordon Ramsay try and play himself.
Oh my God.
He's so intense.
Watch Elton John try and play himself in Kingsman 2. And it's not easy being yourself. And he does a phenomenal job. And yeah, like I say, all the actors, with the exception of two, are formerly incarcerated men. And, you know, this might be
just proves, well, if it's the same people playing, if it's the people playing themselves who are incarcerated, it just proves that being able to express yourself through art does work, because you can go on to have a career, or even like show, look, we've made it out and we've changed, I hope, right?
Absolutely. And they're all very good actors, because I'll be honest with you, again, this is all information I learned after the film when I decided to look stuff up. I just thought to me, that's just a guy that probably auditioned and got a role and is doing good. And it's like, oh no, he's playing himself. He's actually someone who made good.
Well, in a twist from two serious films, my top film was Robot Dreams, which is completely different to anything that we've literally just been discussing. It's an animation with no dialogue about a dog who basically becomes friends with a robot and has a beautiful friendship until the robot ends up going in the sea and is rusted to the point that he's too heavy to be carried home. So the dog and the robot then become separated, and it's just about their lives, how they live without each other over the winter period. And it is quite sad. Just going to say it now. It is quite sad, but it's unbelievably touching, and it's one of the most beautiful films I've seen this year. So I'm laughing just because we've been talking about alcoholism, and then we've had like men who've been in prison, and they were like, "Oh, this dog and robot who were best friends."
This is about loneliness as well, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
sounds devastating.
I've not seen it. You said it's not serious. It sounds pretty serious. It sounds pretty heavy, to be honest.
I've not seen this film, and it sounds devastating.
Yeah, it really does.
It's a kind of trick. It's because there are a lot of films that have come out in more recent years where it's animation, so everyone thinks, oh, it's for kids. And then distributors then think, yeah, we'll market it towards kids. And as you pointed out, yes, it's about loneliness, grief, and trying to get over oneself, and also just looking for friendship.
It sounds like a feature-length version. It sounds like a feature-length version of, that episode of Futurama with Fry's dog.
Oh,
do you know what? That's it's pretty close to that kind of energy.
Oh,
but
no, my heart won't be able to take it.
But the thing is, there is I don't want to give it away, but it's not a completely sad and devastating end. It's a more realistic portrayal about what you do when you drift apart from someone, or what do you do when circumstances come in the way and there's nothing you can do about it.
Well,
so
it sounds like past lives.
We put on a play made up of Hamlet and Freddy Krueger, and that's what we do when circumstances get beyond our control.
Well, in this one, basically, Dog tries to do everything he can to get Robot back and save him from being left on the beach, and then tries to distract himself when he realizes he can't do anything until a certain point. And Robot as well also tries to escape his prison on the beach, but it's there's a sort of trickery that they use to make it seem like this is for kids because of the way the characters are styled, and there's no dialogue, so like kids won't have to be distracted by like words and everything. They can just enjoy the beautiful picture on screen. But this is very much an adult story. Kids can enjoy the picture, but they won't really fully understand the true meaning behind these two characters and what they're going through, to be fair.
If I can pivot to another robot film that is about togetherness, not isolation. The Wild Robot, which I think I remember seeing a teaser trailer for it. I think it was like about this time last year.
I cried.
Right before Godzilla -1, which was a bizarre choice of trailer for before Godzilla -1, but there we are. Yeah, The Wild Robot. I immediately thought, okay, this looks pretty special. And I went and saw it. And I do think DreamWorks, there was an interesting one for this. DreamWorks has been on something of a bit of an upward curve, because something else that was in my top 10 this year was a film called Orion and the Dark. I don't know if either of you caught that. Charlie Kaufman does a kids film, basically. But I laughed, but you know what? I was astonished. Like, I was seriously impressed. It's a very unconventional children's film. It does have dialogue in it, but it's all about like children's fear and the passage of time, and there's not really like a bad guy as such in the narrative. It's very sort of unique and actually very Kaufman-esque. And The Wild Robot kind of feels like, and they're both DreamWorks, The Wild Robot kind of feels like the next evolution on that journey. DreamWorks has kind of somehow managed to come out of nowhere from being the studio that's been all about Shrek and Kung Fu Panda.
I know, thank goodness they changed their tune. Although
Kung Fu Panda was amazing.
Okay, look, if you're going to choose between How to Train Your Dragon, having hit after hit after hit, I like all three of those films. They're beautiful in their own way. And then Kung Fu Panda, which is, I kind of feel, a joke now.
No film called Kung Fu Panda should be as good as that first film is. No film about a Jack Black panda doing Kung Fu should have me in floods of tears. And yet that first movie is legit AF.
I watched Puss in Boots: The Last Wish as well for the first time yesterday, and that's some top tier stuff. But as far as I'm concerned, The Wild Robot passes them all. That's what DreamWorks seems to do. They come up with films that you never expect to be much good, and then suddenly they manage to blow you away. The Wild Robot had me in tears.
Same.
And Lupita Nyong'o does such a phenomenal job of bringing Roz the robot to life. Just starts off as this, very robotic, and it's almost like Alexa-esque droning voice, and then as the film goes on, it gets this added emotion to it, this weight, this feeling, and it's so gradual that you don't even really notice it until the end. And I love the animation style as well. There's such like a move to photorealist 3D animation, which makes me sick. But because the Wild Robot shows what you can do when you actually go the other way and deliberately make things stylized. There's a beautiful blending of styles, not moving quite like the same kind of like eye-catching way that Spider-Verse does, for example, but just it gives texture to things. It makes the world pop and feel so alive and so colorful, and makes you realize what they stand to lose if they don't manage to get their way and survive. And it's just amazing. I loved it so much. And for anybody listening that read the interview, Chris Sanders was a delight to speak to. He is such a lovely man, very enthusiastic about what he does, and he really is. He's managed to hit the peak of his career so far with this.
Can only go up. But I agree with Wild Robot. That was on my Wild Robot. That was on my top 10 as well, actually. And I did get very emotional immediately when I saw the teaser. Then I saw the trailer, got welled up, saw the film, lost it. But I think it's a winning combination that DreamWorks has learnt. Animals and robots are more endearing than just humans on their own.
Agreed.
I mean, same with Robot Dreams, but I'll stop talking about that one. But I don't know how to pivot from that one.
I can pivot from animals, monkeys, Monkey Man, which I don't think was in anyone else's top 10.
Was it ever? I don't know. I don't think so.
I loved it. Just basically John Wick, but in India. And unlike
doesn't he wear a
unlike
mask?
John Wick, which is, I mean, it's the first film Dev Patel's ever directed. And it's unlike John Wick, I mean, which is like very much like almost kind of a fantasy, you know, this kind of like stylist, cyberpunk, like full fantasy world where things don't really happen the way you'd expect them to. No one bats an eyelid when someone gets punched in the street. Monkey Man's not like that. Visually and stylistically, it's the same, but it's very much based in this incredibly gritty and violent portrayal of this kind of undercity. And Patel does this phenomenal job of bringing it to life with this sort of lucidness and adrenaline, and sort of breaking into the whole sort of disconcerting psychosis of the main character as he becomes this sort of underground fighter persona to basically take out revenge. I think at the core, the basic premise is quite straightforward, kind of like the Wild Robot, actually, but it's executed so well, and leaves very few stones unturned. It gets representation of the Indian Hijra community in there, deities, different communities, the caste system. It's really based in sort of the realities of what it's like to live on sort of the economic edges of Indian society. Patel explores it so well, and it's such a thumping, violent, well choreographed action movie. I had such a great time with it. And shout out to Sharlto Copley as well. I'm a big fan of anything that he pops in and actually does a good job.
He's still around.
He's a very underused actor, I think, Sharlto Copley.
I think he had a problem with being typecast as being that weird South African guy from District 9.
He's a weird South African guy, so that kind of tracks, I suppose. But yeah, he does a really good job. But yeah, Dev Patel is, in almost everything he does, extraordinary.
Does he wear a mask in it?
Yes, a monkey mask, hence Monkey Man.
Well, that's good, because otherwise I'd be upset if he wore like a cow mask.
Yeah, no, I'm a cow man.
Where's Monkey Man? Why are you dressed like a cow?
I think someone does dress up like a cow at some point. I think about it. I can't remember.
I think it's just a cow.
It's just a cow. Okay, that makes sense.
I can't remember really.
It came out very early in the year, to be fair. I want to say like March or something. And I feel like films in the beginning half of the year, with one very obvious exception, kind of tend to get forgotten about in these end of year conversations to an extent, just because people's memories.
I love watching the Skins cast grow up and become these great directors and award-winning actors. Skins live!
Thing is, there's only like 2 Skins members who seem to be doing anything lately. If you think back to the first series of Skins, what happened to the one who played Michelle?
Nicholas Hoult is doing very well, and Daniel Kaluuya and Dev Patel.
Not good enough for Katie. Not good enough.
You got to have the whole cast. I was actually interested to know about the documentary you mentioned about Christopher Reeve.
Okay, well, so Super/Man, the Christopher Reeve story, is from the outset a documentary about the life of the actor Christopher Reeve, who most famously played Superman in the Richard Donner Superman film and then 3 subsequent films up into the 80s. But what the documentary is actually about is about the man. So what people might not know about Christopher Reeve is in the 80s, he did a film of Anna Karenina where he had to ride a horse. And despite the fact that he was allergic to horses, he became a really keen equestrian. And in his downtime, he took part in equestrian sports. So in the early 90s, he was taking part in an equestrian, which is a horse competition for those who don't know what equestrian is. He was bucked off his horse mid-jump, fell, and suffered a catastrophic spinal injury. His head was detached from his spine. As a result, he lost all motor function from his neck down. He lost the ability to walk, the ability to breathe on his own, everything. He was technically dead, and surgery reattached his skull to his spine, and he was alive. And what the documentary is about his career. God. It's about him being Superman, about his first long-term relationship, his first 2 children, the breakdown of that. And then what the documentary pivots to is a look at his life after the accident. He became a big advocate for stem cell research. He founded the Christopher Reeve Foundation with his then wife, Dana Reeve. And it becomes about this relationship between this woman and this man who are utterly devoted to each other, and her 2 stepchildren and the son they have together, Will Reeve. And it's about what it took for him to be able to go out on the Oscar stage a year after his accident, to get into directing, to still act, to advocate for the future. And what's really interesting is it doesn't shy away from the fact that Christopher Reeve was hell-bent on walking again. He was hell-bent on getting out of the chair via stem cell research. And what you then discover is that his wife, Dana, basically said to him, "You're too focused on the future, not on the present." And so the charity pivoted to not just looking at the future, but looking at giving people in wheelchairs a properly decent level of life in the present, while looking into stem cell research. It also delves into his long-standing friendship with Robin Williams, and how Robin Williams was basically the key to his happiness. You hear a really lovely story. One of the best moments. He'd come out of a coma. He was in the bed, and obviously his family had been to visit him. And then a very short Russian doctor, head to foot covered in scrubs, came in, started pushing him around, threatened to put a thermometer up his rectum, and pulled his bedsheet off and said, "I see why they call you Superman." And for the first time since he came off that horse, Christopher Reeve burst into laughter. Robin Williams whipped off the scrubs and said, "I knew I could get it out of you." And he threw a party every year for Christopher Reeve, and you find out about this friendship they had. And people like Glenn Close are talking about their friendship and how utterly, not romantically in love, but they were in love with each other as friends, and how he was instrumental in his rehabilitation and his life. And the documentary talks about the bonds he had with people like Susan Sarandon and Jeff Daniels, and his kids talk about how it felt to lose their dad physically. And it then delves into, I don't want to ruin if people don't know what happens, but delves into more tragedy in their life. But it's so beautifully done. It really is. For a film that's about a man who loses his ability to walk and breathe and everything, it leaves you thinking, God, isn't life great? Isn't life beautiful? This man...
Is this one of those life affirming documentaries that you're like, I never expected to watch this film and have my outlook changed?
It is heartbreaking and heart fixing in equal measure. And it also reminds you, not just that Christopher Reeve was a truly impressive man and his wife, Dana, was a truly impressive woman, but God, I miss Robin Williams. I miss him so much. And Glenn Close makes a really upsetting observation that if Christopher Reeve was still alive, Robin Williams would still be alive, and it's heartbreaking.
Oh,
but it's true because
that's so sad.
they would have pushed each other to keep going.
I always find that there's always like at least one documentary that you see a year where you're like, I can't get this out of my head. And
me,
do you think this is?
Do you know what? It's a two-way tie because I did love that, but I also loved Will and Harper, which was another lovely documentary. I loved Will and Harper. I thought Will and Harper was another one where you're like, oh, God, people are just good, aren't they? People.
Is that your top 10 as well?
It is in my top 10. I loved Will and Harper.
It's really weird to have to pivot from these films because my number 2 film was actually one that you also had on your top 10. Love Lies Bleeding.
Loved it.
That was also an early release because I feel like everybody saw it last year and was talking about it because it came out in the US, but here it came out in February. Is it February?
I think, yeah, February sounds about right.
Because it's one of those films where I'm like, oh my God, it still stays with me from the beginning of the year. But I can't, is it February, March, whatever. But for those who don't know what Love Lies Bleeding is about, it's about a bodybuilder who drifts into town and basically has a very hot, steamy romance with the proprietor of a gym. But there's something sinister going on in the town, and the two of them get wrapped up in it. I'm trying to give it a very simple line because I want people to see this film. Because if they haven't seen any of the trailers or the promos of Kristen Stewart and Katie O'Brien, I mean, I don't know why you would not go and see this film or find a way to see it. I believe it's on Netflix now in the UK, isn't it? So no excuses to miss this one. You had this on your top 10 too, yeah. Maybe for different reasons to me.
I just loved this movie. It went straight in at number 1 for my year. I was like, this has everything I want in a film. Scary Ed Harris, muscular ladies, graphic violence, really good needle drops, Kristen Stewart with a weird haircut, like everything I love.
When does Kristen Stewart not have a weird haircut these days? But do you know, one of my favorite moments in the film, not to be a spoiler, but actually I don't think this is a spoiler because we've already mentioned the violence. It's just when a particular moment when she ends up caked in blood and you don't see that moment coming and it's her face.
Oh my God, that is great. It's, yeah, no, I Love Lies Bleeding. I liked Rose Glass's debut, Saint Maud. I thought that was
I also love that.
Really phenomenal piece of work with one of the best final shots of a film ever. The final frame of Saint Maud is on, it still gives me the creeps. And Love Lies Bleeding. Great movie.
Love Lies Bleeding has a couple of amazing moments, but I definitely agree Saint Maud has the better ending. But I feel that Love Lies Bleeding is one of those films where, dare I say it, it has a bit of a San Junipero vibe to it, where there's some awful things happening. We're stuck in a Black Mirror episode. Everything's a bit shit, but actually, you can still find love in a terrible place, in the weirdest of places, and you never know what's going to happen. And it has a nice open ending.
Yep.
I don't feel that's a spoiler.
No, I don't think that's a spoiler at all. No, I thought it was fantastic. Ed Harris is particularly scary. I mean, he's a scary man anyway, but he's very...
Do you know why he's scary? It's because wasn't he into slugs? And he has basically that awful power ring haircut where he's got long hair and a bald head.
Yep. Which is why I shaved my head, so I don't have that. Because otherwise I would be scared.
But if you wanted, you could be scary Ed Harris when you're older.
I could eat a whole bug in one bite. I could do that. I don't want to, but I could. Yeah, no, I love Lies Bleeding. Because also what people don't get from it is just how funny it is. It's so blackly comic in places.
It's dark.
It's almost Coen Brothers-esque, like the violence, but then, there's people like almost slipping over in blood after this horrible violence. It's like, there's like hiding bodies and then there's like violence happening, but the cat's licking up blood and things like that. And you're like, this is Coen-esque. And I think it's fantastic.
I think it's better than, I love the Coen brothers, but I think it's better than Coen-esque because, it does take that baseline of what Coen brothers normally do, or rather used to do. And it takes it a bit further to where I don't know, the Coen brothers had a way of making everything a bit goofy and serious, whereas this one, as you said, the comedy is heightened, so the goofiness is kind of left to one character. And you still kind of feel sorry for her a little bit.
Not her teeth. Terrible teeth.
Terrible teeth, terrible everything, but you just kind of feel she's a very sad character. Sorry, the character we're referring to is this girl who's obsessed with Kirsten Stewart's character in the film and keeps trying to get her to take her for drinks and like hang out with her, and she feels pushed aside when Katie O'Brien's character comes in and basically takes up all of Kristen Stewart's time, and it's totally warranted. But I think it's beyond Coen-esque, but that's the baseline you go for, and it's gone further. And I just can't wait to see what Rose Glass does next.
Yeah, me too.
Because she started off high and she just keeps on going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of high, finally got a good segue into my final choice, Kneecap. About 3 Irish rappers who basically take over. I don't know how, this is a very difficult one to describe because it's not quite it's kind of like a music bio, but it's also about, I don't know, holding your own and defending Irish language. And I went into this film not actually reading anything about it. All that I knew was that it was in Irish language and that Michael Fassbender had a small part. So I was like, oh, okay, let's just roll with this. And I did not expect it to be about music, about who they're meant to be like young guys in their 20s who become friends with this older guy who's a music teacher, and together they make this most impossible trio of musical geniuses while trying to fight the oppressor, the English, basically, in Northern Ireland. Or is it north of Ireland? That's the argument that they have throughout the film. But and also, while performing, they just do a ton of drugs as well, hence the segue for the cocaine. Although their drug of choice is ketamine, I think. They take that quite a lot before they go on stage. I just found this film unbelievably entertaining and unlike anything I've seen. It's not my top, but it is in my top 3. That's why I'm mentioning it.
Yeah.
But have you seen this one?
Yeah. So as someone who is half Irish, and a lot of my Irish family members are musicians, and you know, we sort of come from similar areas to the boys in the film. Yes, my entire family were like, "What's this Kneecap about, Paul? What's this Irish movie with the musicians about?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, there's this coming." They're like, we want to see it." So it was the only film everyone in my family has seen this year. People who never go to the cinema were like, "Irish? Oh, I'm there." I'm like, lived in London your whole life. But no, I love Kneecap. I loved how anarchic it was. Do you know what? As music biopics go, I think they should have the personality of the people they're portraying. Is why I liked Rocket Man. Rocket Man feels like Elton John. Better Man
I agree with
feels
that.
like Robbie Williams, actually.
I'm yet to see Better Man.
I enjoyed it. I also like Robbie Williams music, so there we go. And Kneecap captured what I mean, I wasn't familiar with this particular group before the film, but you definitely get a feel for who they are as people and what their music is about and what they're like. And it's also just ridiculously entertaining. It's just enjoyable.
Yeah. It helps that they actually play themselves, or a version of themselves.
And again, they do it well.
And
because, like I said, it's not easy playing yourself. Like to go back to.
So they actually had acting lessons. They were given acting lessons, and apparently they were late to every single lesson that they had.
Love it.
There was also so this film actually won quite big at the Biffers. And one of the band members, I apologize, I can't remember which one it was, but one of them pointed out that they found it very ironic that an Irish language film won Best British Film at the Biffers. So, Paul, your last film on your top 3.
So my last film is Heretic, which is a film by the gentleman who wrote the first A Quiet Place film and then did the 65 film, the Adam Driver fights dinosaurs.
Oh no, not 65.
65 bad, Quiet Place good. So they've written and directed this. Heretic is a very interesting film. It's about two Mormon missionaries, two young women, who show up in the middle of a storm to the house of a seemingly nice enough guy played by Hugh Grant called Mr. Reed, who invites them in because he wants to discuss the Church of the Latter-day Saints. They say they can't go in if there's not a woman present. He says, my wife is in and she's making a pie. Come on in. And he then starts to talk to them. There's no sign of a pie. There's no sign of a wife. And every time they try to leave, he just catches them with a question that makes them stay a little bit longer and a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And all the while, this massive storm is raging outside. And the first 2/3 of Heretic is a lot of conversations about religion, about doctrine, about how one religion feeds into another religion, and how that's a lot like songs being ripped off of other songs or games being ripped off of other games. And it just seems like he just wants to tear their faith apart. But he's not aggressive, but he is very firm. And they want to leave, but they don't want to be rude. And the horror of the first 2/3 of Heretic is basically the absolute horror of being impolite. And that tension of not wanting to offend someone, but also being very uncomfortable. And Hugh Grant does Hugh Grant things. All the Hugh Grant mannerisms that you know from Notting Hill and Four Weddings. He's doing it. He's Hugh Grant turned up to 11. But when you strip away rom-com and, you know, Wet, Wet, Wet and all that sort of stuff, and you put a slightly sinister music in the background, he goes from charming oaf to terrifying. It's a fascinating performance, and the film it's so tense in those first 2/3 where you have these two women who, you know, they're meant to be about 21. One of them is Sophie Thatcher, who is so great in Yellow Jackets, which I'm a big fan of.
I am. Seen people getting excited about her being in this.
Yeah, and Hugh Grant goes off on wild tangents about the history of Monopoly and about how these girls should know the Hollies song. He says, you must know this song because Radiohead ripped it off with Creep. And if you don't know that, then they were ripped off by Lana Del Rey. And he goes off on tangents about Star Wars and does the worst Jar Jar Binks impression. And it's just that tension that grows to a point where you're like, I can't take this impolite, polite, I want to leave, but I don't want to offend you tension. And then it turns and it becomes something completely different. And what I loved is that even when the third part of the film kicks in, you've still got that lingering thing of they still don't want to offend him. They still
even when they're in mortal danger.
They still don't want to be impolite. They still don't want to upset him, or at least one of them doesn't want to be too rude because she thinks it's not what the Mormon faith dictates. And it's fascinating. I love faith-based horror anyway.
Same. I like it when there's a discussion about it, and especially when it rips apart and sort of says, actually, have you thought about this a different way? Or have you realized that religion is, you know, this.
And it's that kind of thing of someone not necessarily going, your faith is stupid, but poking enough holes in your faith that you're like, you are clearly being incredibly rude to these two girls. But these two girls are still terrified to be impolite back. And it also has my favorite line reading of the year, which is when Hugh Grant randomly goes, what are your thoughts on polygamy? I thought it was fantastic. And I think Hugh Grant gives one of the best performances of his career. And in horror this year, I thought Heretic was hilarious in that, like I say, in the same way Curb Your Enthusiasm is funny, but so painful, where you're like, stop being impolite. And just these, it's also such a well-written film that the dialogue and exchanges, you're just like, how have you gone from like the Muslim faith to Monopoly. I can't actually, and then to saying that
Genius.
people worship Jar Jar Binks. This makes no sense, and yet I am utterly engrossed. I think it's one of the horror films of the year, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I feel like this don't think it's been overlooked, but I feel like it hasn't been as upplayed as some other horror films that came out this year. It sort of like snuck in there when it was released.
Yeah,
If that makes sense. Snuck in there when it was released. But it's one of those films that you knew it was coming, but then when it was released, you're like, oh, okay, that came out. And everyone's been, on the whole, most people have been saying how much they've enjoyed it and how much they appreciated Hugh Grant. But as opposed to some other films where you feel like it's been in your face constantly throughout the whole year.
yeah, absolutely. People aren't telling you this is the scariest film in history, and then it's just not.
To be fair, the one I'm talking about I actually enjoyed, but it didn't make it to my top 10 list, so I'm not going to discuss it.
I was promised cinematic trauma and got not that.
And on that note, that brings us to a close for our top 3 films each of this year. Thank you to Paul, thank you to James, and thank you to David for being, on the whole, quiet.
Our fearless leader.
I'm doing a thumbs up on screen. Doesn't translate to podcast day.
But it does when you verbally say it. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for joining us, and we will reveal our top 10 films from FilmHounds very soon.